Good day, one and all. Buongiorno, guten tag, bore da, as we say in Carnarvon. Yes, here we are. Welcome to another Manchester Magic podcast. Yes, we're already up to mile 4. How about that, eh? And we have a wonderful super guest on to talk about mile 4, Manchester Marathon and all that jazz. This person has done Manchester Marathon many, many times. And from what I recall from my notes, is local to Manchester. So be sure to listen all the way through because this person has so many top tips on Manchester Marathon, which I'm sure you're going to want to learn about. And even if you're not running Manchester Marathon, wonderful experience of running, marathon running and so on, which I know you'll want to learn from. So without further ado, let me bring on the one, the only, Alia Pike. Hello, good evening, Alia.
Hello, good evening. I love that introduction.
Did you? Oh, yes, I've been practicing all of the 5 seconds from on that. But yeah, hello there. It's great to see. Nice, colourful background you've got there. Posters, the world. So we don't want to give too much away. But yeah, where in the world are you?
So I am in Salford, which is 2 miles from the start of the Manchester Marathon. And so literally that direction, you head towards Old Trafford Football Ground, and it starts just near there.
Yes, for those who don't know, Old Trafford. Yes, Old Trafford Football Ground, and not forgetting the cricket ground.
The cricket ground.
The cricket ground there. So those of you who are Manchester United fans, you might go rah, and if you're Manchester City fans, you might go ooh, not so rah. But yeah, Alia, I mean, it's great having you on. Thank you so much for giving your time for coming on. We're going to have a nice little chat about lots of things, not just Manchester Marathon, but other things that you've been doing. But to sort of kick things off, obviously this is a chatty adventures channel. You do like a good chat, and I think you're saying that podcasts are your thing. For those who are into podcasts, what kind of podcasts are your thing, Alia?
So I really love the Guilty Feminist podcast, which is sort of comedy podcast, but also looks at loads of social issues around being a woman and feminism, but with a guilty slant to it as well. And so yeah, I really like that. I'm a youth worker, so I listen to some youth work podcasts. And then I've just recently discovered Anna Harding and Ali Bailey, so the Harding and Bailey podcast, where they talk about their running adventures. And so I've been listening to that as well.
Right.
And the colour, something rhymes, and something rhymes with the colour purple, which is Susie Dent's podcast. It's brilliant. You're learning all of these really weird words and what do they mean. So I'm hoping that'll increase my vocabulary and I won't just say amazing, well done, brilliant all the time.
Super duper, or other things like that. So that's quite a montage or repertoire of different kinds of podcasts. So not just running, but a complete mix. And obviously, you say you work in youth and community, so it's quite a demanding work that you, if I dare say, for those I know who work with youth of all different ages, whether they be school teachers or but that must be quite demanding. How do you fit it in with your running?
So, so now my role, I work for the National Youth Agency, and so now my role is supporting in the training and development of youth workers, and so I work with universities around their youth work degrees, so I don't do as much kind of direct delivery with young people. Still do the Friday nights at my church, but before that, and because now I work from home, but before that, when I worked about 5 miles away from where I live in Didsbury, and so I used to run home from there. And so it was a really nice way to kind of fit running in. And that used to run down the Parkway in Manchester. It's a really busy road. And yeah, watching all the people queuing in cars and just being free to run. And I say about 5 miles because I convinced myself that it was only 5 miles, but it was closer to 6. But yeah, that often I sort
Who's counting? Who's counting?
Yeah. And so yeah, and now I'm really fortunate. I work 4 days a week, and so I often will do my long runs on that day off. Sometimes local, sometimes I might head out. So really lucky that where I am in the northwest, like the sort of hills of Oldham and things aren't too far away to drive to get onto the trails. But I often talk about how I live in a concrete jungle, and there are a lot of roads to cross. But with a little bit of learning, I found some kind of routes that follow the River Irwell. Aren't so many roads to cross, so I can do not so much trail, but just a bit more off-road on a footpath and things.
Yeah,
so, yeah. And I love exploring new places when I go running and seeing where to go to.
Sounds excellent. Whenever I'm up in Manchester, I always hit the canals because my sister and brother-in-law live in the city centre. So the canal is in the city centre, and it's quite, you can run for miles and miles without seeing any roads once you hit the canal. But yeah, it may be a concrete jungle, but there's places to discover. Speaking of discovery, how did you discover running? How did you get into running?
So I'd always liked sports as a child and as a teenager. I played hockey and netball at school, and really liked doing sport and things. And then I moved up to here, up to the northwest, up to Salford, and joined a gym and things, and like did exercise and stuff. But it was when I changed jobs and took a pay cut and thought, oh, maybe I'll quit the gym and save a bit of money, and thought, well, I'll have a try at running. And I'm not going to lie, I found it really hard. I still remember like running to the corner of the road, like looking at my watch and thinking, how's it only been 10 seconds? I'm absolutely shattered. And I used to run this same route along the river and back again. And now, like, it's only about 3 miles there and back. It's a nice warm up. That's a park run. But at the time, it felt so far. And so I'm sort of plodding along. And then they opened up a running shop in Manchester City Centre, and they started a community running group. And I joined up with them, and then met all these other lovely people who also loved running, and did some running with them. And it slowly grew from there. And I can remember we entered our first 10K together as a group. And I mean, it's funny now because the furthest I've ran now is 45 miles. But at the time, I was like, oh, double figures. 10K, that's double figures. I'm running in double figures. I'm oh my gosh, I'm going to do a 10K, and it took over an hour, and but
that's still quick.
Yeah,
it's still quick.
It's not. I find the whole thing of, is it quick, is it slow? It's all relative. It's that I've been last in races. I've been so last in the race that I'd timed out. And then I also did a little local race and came fourth. I've come first in my age group at my local park run. And so there's always someone who's going to run quicker. There's generally always someone who's going to run slower. So but I remember doing this 10K, and then my friend pointed out, well, 10K is 6 miles. And so why don't we do a bit more? And she does some half marathons, and I just gradually built it up from there. And then, and it kind of, the love of running sort of grew from that, grew from meeting other people. And I think that was what really helped, was meeting other people who ran and chatting to them and feeling part of something a little bit more than just me out on my own, doing my 3 miles there and back again. And it sort of grew from there, really.
That sounds amazing. The fact that you went straight into a 10K. I mean, I have heard other stories of people going straight into other distances, but 10K, I think people tend to forget. And you mentioned parkrun. People seem to think that, parkrun, because we hear a lot about endurance races and so on, 30 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles. People seem to think, oh, it's only 5K, it's only 10K, but it's still a long way, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And years ago in the 90s, I did Race for Life, which was a 5K.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And like I can remember.
Was it a 5K? I thought it was 1 mile when I done it.
No, I did. Definitely 5K. Definitely 5K. And I can remember I training for that, but I just did it as a one-off. I never really got the bug of wanting to run again after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that to me back then, that seemed like a lot. That seemed really far. Because I think at school the furthest we ran was a mile. We did sort of the 1,600 meters. And so yeah. But
it is
the whole thing of distance is always a bit. It's what you want to do, and if you want to run far, run far. If you want to run not so far, all of it is running, and all of it is for all of us to try.
Absolutely. I think the thing I totally echo for the feeling. It does feel hard and it's difficult. And those who are listening, although I do recall the Race for Life, it was called, wasn't it? It was for Feed the World. Oh, I think I've got the T-shirt somewhere.
No. For Race for Life was all about raising money for breast cancer charities and cancer research.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, race. I'm getting mixed up with the what was it called? The one of the Bob Geldof one, Feed the World race.
Yeah.
Which I think was a mob. Yes, sorry. Yes, I'm getting all mixed up. But whatever the charity events are, I think certainly for me back in them days, obviously you done the training for it. I think I just rocked up to the start along with however many thousand people ran, and then after about 100 meters, it was like, and then you just sort of walk the rest of it. But yes, good old Bob Geldof. That was 1985, I think. But show me age. No training, you just rock up. Because when we're young, we can just go, can't we?
Yeah.
Obviously, you're considerably younger than myself, Alias, but I can only talk for the over 60s. We have to do a lot more practice to keep it going. So that's quite an introduction. You had what I would call a lot of the positives. So you were immediately with a group of like-minded people, which is a big tick, and you were enjoying it, another big tick, and you went straight into, together as a group, joined in the race. Would you say that's a recipe for success?
I think it worked for me.
Loaded question there. I think.
Yeah.
We know the answer. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. Yeah.
But it's finding what you love. So I remember, one of the people at the running group she never does events. She does not like doing events and racing. And, and so, it wasn't for her. I think I certainly, when I started to move up to kind of bigger distances, I did find it hard because I got quite obsessed with the time. And so I convinced myself that I should be able to do a marathon in under 5 hours, and didn't on the first or the second or the third or the fourth. And so that was quite hard. And that sort of made me kind of think, well, why can't I? And why do other people? And sort of didn't enjoy the racing element of the event. Love the events and love running with people. Yeah. And I met at Chester Marathon, met this lovely woman who, she was on her 238th marathon at that race.
Whoa.
And she was just like, just let the time go. Just let it go. It doesn't matter. Why does it matter? And that really shifted things. And and eventually on my 5th time at Manchester, I went under 5 hours, literally by seconds, but I was so buzzing. I remember it started with a 4 and I was, so
That is brilliant. We'll talk more about those multiple Manchester marathons, but you mentioned about time. So when you said you were obsessed about time, did you keep looking at your watch as you're going along?
Yeah. Looking at the watch and seeing where, if a pacer came past, which pacer was it? And and they're just arbitrary numbers. I just made it up. I should be able to run a marathon in under 5 hours with no real understanding. I was listening to a podcast again. I was listening to a podcast where that whole thing of, if I could do a 5K in half an hour, I should be able to do a 10K in under an hour.
Oh, right. You multiply it up. Yeah.
And it just doesn't work like that.
No.
But when I was new to running, I didn't really know that. And so I thought, I should be able to. And they're just, whereas now the time is the time. And sometimes I can't tell you what all my times are in my races because I just don't know.
Yeah. And to be honest, Alia, for me, whilst I may be running relatively quick times for what people may think, but that thing about where we think, you can do this and you can do this, I think we all do it. And I certainly recall one time running the fastest half marathon, I think 1 hour 25. And for some reason I thought, in 2 weeks' time I can run a 120, even though I'd ran my guts out, that was as fast. We tend to, I don't know how we come up with that, whether there's things on social media that make us believe we can do that. And really it's not true. But when you also touched on a friend, you mentioned a friend or running person who doesn't like events, and I totally get that as well. And whilst we're not here to talk about London Marathon, I know a lot of people who will never enter London Marathon because it's too busy or it's too crowded or what. And I totally get that as well, because the big city marathons are great for some people, but for others they're happy running with a small group or a non-event event, whether it's because it's timed or whatever. But so I totally get that. But you obviously love Manchester, because you've not done it once. You mentioned the times and you had that arbitrary number, five's alive. How did you come up with that magic 5 number? Was it literally, is it your favorite number, or did it just appear in your head?
I generally, I think that I thought, so I'd done a half. So I'd done I think the first half I did was about 2 hours, 16 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of thought, oh, well, you know, should be able to run it in under 5 hours, and maybe even 4.5, 4 hours 40, something like that. Like, and because you know, never ran one, so yeah, just doubled my half time, gave a little buffer, and thought, oh, that'll do.
Yes, yeah. But you are one of the original. So going back to when you started Manchester Marathon, because you've ran it a number of times, and you were there at the very beginning. I think you told me it's got a more fuller name, or had a more fuller name when it first came out. So tell us a bit. And it was the very first Manchester that you took part in, wasn't it?
Well, so it had a time before that as well. So I think back in the 80s, 90s.
Yeah, I think there was 70s, 80s, but going back into the modern times of the 2000s, was it 2011, the first
2012.
one? 12, so, it was resurrected. And you were there.
And so it was called Greater Manchester Marathon in Trafford, in a really catchy title.
The Greater Manchester Marathon in Trafford.
Yeah.
So it told you exactly where it was.
Yeah.
And it was a Greater Manchester, which obviously incorporates Oldham and Rochdale and all that. So it's Greater Manchester. And the route was?
Let's just be clear, it's horrendous. If you meet anyone who did 2012 Manchester Marathon, they'll tell you it was horrendous.
A bit different to what it is now.
Yeah, it was. Well, it was partly the weather. So it was really cold. It rained, it hailed.
Was it April? Was it April?
It was April, yeah. It was April. And just kind of freak weather, really. And so we started off in a park in Stretford. That's name's gone completely out of my head. But we started there, and so we headed off, and you know, there's a few little puddles and things, and you kind of sometimes people are dodging the puddles and stuff. And then we went into Dunham Massey, which is a National Trust area, and it's a beautiful deer park, and it was a mud bath. And so
through mud.
So suddenly you've got this horrible muddy, just a long track. It was a long track, horrible muddy track that you had to do, and so that put people off. They gave you these gel, they're called shocks or something. So they're like these gels, sort of jelly kind of squares that came in.
Oh right, yeah.
And they came in a packet about 10, but for some reason they didn't break the packets up, they didn't put them out, and so you would grab one and then your hands are so cold you can't open it. It was just, honestly I can't explain how awful it was. And then and I do have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the Manchester Marathon. So we then finished, and we finished. So when you do the route now, you'll head out and you'll see Stretford Mall and you'll come back in. But underneath that road, there's a footpath. And what someone decided for the route was that we should go down those spiral steps. This is within the last mile of a marathon. Let's make us go down steps.
Wow.
Under a road, back up steps, and then into the park. And so that was horrible, having to do steps in your last mile. And we got into the park, and I was really lucky. My husband and my mum came and met me. They had my bag of really lovely warm clothes. But I met a running friend who was so happy because they had got under 3 hours, just under 3 hours. And then they waited 2 hours to get their bag back, and it was freezing cold, and they ran out of blankets. It just
wow.
Yeah. So a bit
of a change.
And I went home, and I remember thinking that was horrendous. It was horrible and cold and wet and dreadful. And how can people say marathons are great? And thought, well, that can't really be what they're like. And so I then carried on and did did it again the following year. I DNF'd in that following year. I don't know what I did to my I got shooting pains down my leg, and I just thought, this is hurting too much, and stopped. And then I went back again, and it was slightly better. And then I'm trying to remember whether it was that year or the year after. So it's either 14 or 15. They moved the finish quite late. And so this kind of panicked loads of people who weren't local and trying to understand what it was going to be like. And then what we don't like to talk about is that the course wasn't measured properly.
That one, yes.
And so for
that
13,
went on for a few years, didn't it?
Yeah, that was 13, 14, 15. The course wasn't measured properly. Now, for me, I started 380 meters back because, you know, I was one of the slow runners, so I started back and walked to the start. But yeah, and so there's always been these slight little problems. But yeah, that first one was just. I remember my hands all swelled up because they were so cold.
Wow.
You know, I just hadn't experienced running in weather quite like that for so long. And it was, if you meet people who did the 2012 one, they'll all kind of agree and go, yeah.
They'll always remind you of it. It's one of those memories that you'll remember forever.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a bit like for those who ran Boston 2018, I think it was 17, 18, the monsoon weather that we had and snowstorms. But hey, you know, weather, that's the joys of marathon running in spring. Are we doing a good selling job for everybody here? You know, are you sold on taking a part in a marathon? Spring and autumn is the season of marathon running, and we know what the weather can be like. Not is always like that. It can be really hot, it can be really cold, it can be wet, it can be windy. But the joy of it is you're almost guaranteed, almost, not always, that the weather can be right, you know, about 10 degrees, which is great racing weather. Not maybe good for standing around supporting, but it's great for racing weather. So I think that's all part of the type 2 fun, I think some people call it. But you're still there smiling, and you still kept persisting, didn't you? So however many years. And then you said eventually you broke that 5 hour, that number that you plucked from the air. And so, how did you feel when you finished? Were you looking at your watch and going, "Oh, look what happened"?
Well, so it was slightly panicked. So that year, the finish is on the road where you finish now. Yeah. Except that now you're going to come that way to the finish. Yeah. And whereas we came from that way to the finish.
The other direction, wasn't it?
And what would happen is we turned onto the road. It's a really long, quite a long straight road. And so we turned onto it, and I thought, I can see the finish. But we had almost, not quite, but almost like a mile to go. And so it's
one long straight, isn't it?
Long straight road. And so then suddenly kind of seeing the time and thinking, oh, come on, you've got this. But also thinking, oh, it's further than you think. It's further than you think. Keep pushing. I was really happy, and I think that probably I'm a bit naughty at not sticking. Well, I've never really stuck to a training plan, but I did train for that marathon quite well. And one of the things that I really did leading up to that one, someone had talked about using your last mile as a cool down walk in your training runs. And so really making sure that you cool down properly. And that really helped me with recovery and then being able to do other runs during that week. And so I was really pleased. And there's a lovely photo that my mum got. My mum's brilliant. And my mum will, if you want tips on how do you see someone at the finish of a marathon, I heard her talking to someone explaining about, so Alia says she'll be there at this time. So what you have to do is about 40 minutes before then, you have to be at the finish, and then gradually you edge your way forward because other people will be leaving as their loved ones have come past. She was right on the line. And so there's a photo of me smiling, holding my little watch. And I know the time says 4:59 or something like 48 seconds or something. So I was really, really pleased. And then I think again that was a year when perhaps the organisation of the finish wasn't quite as good as it could have been. So that's what I mean about this love-hate relationship with this marathon. So really happy that I'd finished under my 5 hours. But then when you went into the sort of, you go through the finishing area, we headed into the car park of the cricket ground, and they'd let everyone into it, including all the spectators and things. And so suddenly it was just a mass of people, and I was sort of shuffling with my little goodie bag and things and trying to get out, and could barely move because it was just rammed full of people trying to find loved ones. And and I had to borrow, I didn't have a phone with me, and I had to borrow someone's phone. The runner that I knew, thankfully, bumped into, and had to use their phone to ring my mum to try and tell her where to meet me. And I think I've gone under 5 hours, I think maybe three times in a marathon now. So
fine-tuned athlete now. So thankfully, I think they've ironed out some of those little issues. Certainly, the past 2 years I've ran it, they've ironed out those issues, and obviously it is the correct distance now. But again, we often joke about that. I do recall people were quite adamant that Chicago Marathon was not 26.2, despite Chicago Marathon having ran the same course for decades. When you run through skyscrapers, your GPS doesn't record correctly. So everybody believed they'd ran 27 miles who had a certain type of watch. But no, it was 26.2. But when you have it out and backs, there was that story of Brighton as well, where the cone wasn't placed in the right position, and I think that one was too long. There's lots of stories of various marathons, and I'm sure those who are listening, leave it in the comments below if you've done a marathon that was measured incorrectly, or any distance, even a park run 10K. Put it in the comments below. But even from all those experiences, what are your big lessons learned? What would you say your top 3 are, Alia, in terms of learning? And by the way, if you want to send us that picture of you holding the watch, because I've got another picture for the thumbnail. But any other pictures with you looking happy and what you're running, send them over. But would you say what you say 3 key lessons you've learned from those marathons?
To not worry about the time. Generally, I think that's been one of my biggest lessons. That both myself and one of my friends that one of the years she ran it and I didn't run it, but I ran down and met her and ran on the course of her. She'd had a really terrible night's sleep, and then the next day isn't great. So sometimes there are outside factors, the weather, how we've slept, what stress is going on in our life. And so I think, to let the time go, to practice what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat, all of that practicing stuff. So I remember before my very first marathon, there was an ultra runner who was part of the running community. And so I chatted to her about how to get the digestion moving, should we say?
Oh, yeah. Before the race, not during.
Right. What were her tips and things? And so I can remember practicing eating different things for breakfast leading up to the marathon, to work out actually what works best for me. And so I do think that practicing, what you, particularly beforehand, what you're going to eat, and then to just enjoy everything about it, the atmosphere, everything about it, and not to put too much pressure on yourself, and just have a really great time. And
that sounds top tips there, Alia. So it's basically, don't worry about the time, practice the nutrition, eating, drinking, and all that. So obviously the stuff that we want to ensure is done before the race. If it happens during, it's not the end of the world. I've been caught short on many of those, so I wouldn't worry about that. And the key thing, number 3, is enjoy it. It's a long way. It is a magnificent event. But for you, obviously being mile 4, Alia, in the podcast series, I often throw this out to the guests, what the mileage is. So there's 2, or there could be 1 question or 2. Mile 4 of Manchester Marathon, or mile 4 of any marathon, what would be your tip for someone at mile 4 of the marathon?
So for Manchester,
they're running, so from 3 to 4, they're completing, the 4th mile that you're completing.
So particularly for Manchester, I think couple of years ago I ran it. I'm trying to remember when it was, and they'd added in a bit of, they changed the route. The route's really nice, and I have to say the route's really, really nice. And we ran through Manchester city centre.
It's great,
and
isn't it?
you're around the mile 4 marker then, and there's loads of crowds. And I think I may have done a 9-minute mile.
Oh, you got excited.
Yeah, the crowds just, oh my gosh, it was amazing. Loads and loads of crowds. I saw people I knew, and it made me run a little bit quicker, which possibly isn't always a great thing to do. 9-minute miles is like, that's my peak speed for me. And so so particularly for Manchester, mile 4, just, there's going to be the crowds. Really enjoy that. It's great. But also, you know, like, don't get
hold back the throttle. Yeah, hold the throttle back a bit.
Away with it. But for generally in a marathon, you know, I think, hopefully mile 4, kind of in your groove. Like, you sort of settled in and enjoying it, and depends, you know, the maths that some people do in their heads. And so that the Chester Marathon, there are aid stations every 3 miles. Mm-hmm. And so you can be like, I've only got to do these 8 aid stations and then I'm done. And, you know, so you might want to you can kind of get to that mile 4 and you sort of play some maths, like, I've done a park run. Okay, I've only got to do this. Or, I've done mile 4. It's only this far. And you start to do all those little kind of, number things. But that hopefully you've kind of settled in, everything feels all right. And just enjoy the run. And that you probably don't need a wee.
No. But if you do, you can still go for one.
If you do, you can go for one. But often I think, oh, do I need the loo? No, I don't. It's in my mind somewhere. But yeah.
That's great for mile 4. So you're getting into the groove. It is quite sensible. You know, you're getting into the groove. So you're not going too fast, but getting into what you would call your marathon pace. So it should still feel comfortable. Do you have any specific hints, tips for marathon running, you know, for someone who's a novice beginner as they're going through? So mile 4, again, not put the accelerator on, but you mentioned something about, you know, Chester has certain things and you count down the aid stations, or I know some people slice it. It's however many park runs, or, you know, it's two 10Ks and a whatever. Have you got any hints and tips for beginners and how they could help themselves slicing down a marathon? Because 26.2 is a long way.
Yeah, I often find those early miles seem to tick by really quickly. And so depending on where the marathon is, but often as someone who hangs around the 5-hour mark in a road marathon, there's still quite a good crowd of people running at that pace in those early few miles. And so I often don't need to do all the kind of the mind games, the thinking, it's only this far and things, until I'm later on in the race, because I often find there's still quite a good crowd of other runners around me. And so but that it's and that often I think we've already done 4. It's ticking by.
So you bring in the mind games towards the latter stages.
I'm saving them. They're saved up.
They dedicate each of the last 6 miles to someone. That's one thing I've heard. But certainly I think the splicing and dicing, you know, it's two 10 miles and a 10K. So you've got 3 things to think about. So you run 10 miles. That's great. I've done 10. Run another 10. Great. I've done 10. Now I've only got 10K to do. Let's go on. And obviously the last bit, I've just got a park run to. I've often heard that one. But obviously it's not like the beginning of the park run at 9 a.m. It's more like, you know, you're at the back end. But what would you say is when you were doing the training, what's your typical week of training? You say you don't follow a plan per se, but to finish in those times does take some, you know, whilst you say you're not following a plan, you're obviously doing something that works, because you don't finish in those times by just turning up. You are doing something. So what would be a typical week for you?
So I always do, there'll be a long run somewhere in the week. So either on a day off on Thursday or else on a Sunday. And I tend to get up to about 20 miles. And so so around about 20 miles or 4 hours of running, and that I'll get up to that kind of time. And then it's sort of, it varies. So I did a couple of years ago, I did quite an intense training plan that my friend had done, where you actually do quite high miles during the week. And then you sort of do a peak week, and then it drops for a couple of weeks, and you do a peak and it drops. And so, but your sort of midweek run is also around about 8, 9, 10 miles, even though you might have done 16 on the Sunday as well, and things. And so, and that I found that really interesting, because that gave me quite a lot of confidence that the miles are in the legs. But I'm terrible at doing speed stuff, so I don't do any speed stuff. Like, my closest to speed stuff is chasing my husband around parkrun and trying to get under 30 minutes, and I think that's enough. That's speed for me.
And that's for a 5K. No, that sounds totally adequate, Alia. But I would. So you'd never ran 26, 27 miles. I hear of people who feel the need to run a marathon distance as part of the training runs.
No, but I did have my so two of my friends. I've helped 3 people to kind of give some training tips, and ran with 3 people to get them up to a marathon, do a marathon, and all 3 of those people got under 5 hours on their first marathon. So I didn't, but they did. But one of those friends, we talked lots about actually they wanted to cover the distance, and so actually they did it walking, and so they did a really long walk and did the distance in that sense. And I know other people who it depends a bit. So again, I'm really aware that a 3-hour marathon runner and a 5-hour marathon runner, it's quite different what your training's going to be like, and like how long you're on your feet for. And so for some people, it might be that they want to know they can cover the distance, and actually that's an anxiety they've got. And so before my very first marathon back in 2012, I got up to 18 miles and didn't do above that. But I was running quite a bit during the week. And that I'd done really long walks. I remember I'd done a camping trip with my mum, and we'd done a really long walk, and we'd walked about 8 hours for the whole day, a little break for lunch and things, but I'd been on my feet all of that time. And so, I'm standing now, I have a standing desk at home, and so I'm used to being on my feet quite a bit. Whereas if you're someone who is sat quite a lot and doesn't have a particularly active job, then you might think, am I going to cope with physically moving for that amount of time? And so they might want to perhaps train up to running for 20 miles, 21 miles, but they might want to do some additional walking on top of that, and perhaps do a long walk so they're on their feet for that amount of time.
That's excellent point there. The time on feet. You're not the first person to say that, and a lot of people, without me realizing, I think before I started running, I was doing long distance walks. So without realizing, I think I'd already prepped myself for endurance running. So I took to the training. By the way, it was a 10K, like yourself, was the first race. So I didn't go straight into marathon. Never had any intention of doing marathons. But yeah, the walking, that is a brilliant tip, Alia, is time on feet. And also to take into account what jobs we have. Because I've spoken to people from all different types of professions, and whether they're in an office or not an office, it's, as you've just said, if you're on your feet. So a lot of people have standing desks. You're on your feet. If you work in retail, you're on your feet without you realizing, a lot of people have already done most of the training and probably only need to do, say, a 16 miler at the weekend and a couple of short runs in a week, and jobs are good. But that's brilliant. I love that tip. That is really good. But there's so much there about marathons. I've got to ask you, and it's great sharing all that, but what next for you? Because you seem like a very active person, fun. You've obviously got a lot of energy, and I guess that's why you work in the industry that you work in, with youth. So I guess, the youth people keep you young and zestful. So, and you are as well. What have you got coming up? What's next for you? You've done all these marathons. What next for you?
Well, I'm very excited. So currently here on the spare bed, I'm slowly starting to pack.
Is that why there's a map of the world behind you?
Yeah. So I'm studying at the moment. So I'm doing an MA, and that gets handed in next week on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, I'm flying out to Turkey. I'm going to visit my friend in Turkey. And then the following Monday, the 27th of November, I am flying into Queen Alia Airport.
Hooray! All hail Your Majesty, Queen Alia.
So I'm flying into Queen Alia Airport in Jordan. And I'm joining up with Impact Marathon. And the whole idea of Impact Marathons is about kind of having a really positive impact on the community that you're going to the country that you're going to.
Yeah.
So not just being a tourist and kind of turning up and consuming from that country, but inputting into it. So so we head out, we all arrive into Amman in Jordan, we meet together, and then we do some community volunteering projects. And so we're going to do those for a few days. Then we head into Petra and have a look around there, into the Wadi Rum Desert, and then I'm running a marathon in the Wadi Rum Desert. So I super excited about that. I'm excited about
in the desert in Jordan.
Yeah.
And Queen Alia, she was the Queen of Jordan, or is the Queen of Jordan, is she?
So she's the Queen of, she was the Queen of Jordan. And then she sadly died just before I was born, and my mum saw the name. I thought, oh, that's a lovely name. But her name kind of still exists in the family. So I think there's a princess that's Alia as well, I think. So it's sort of a name that is continued on through the royal family.
And of course, Petra is one of the World Heritage Sites, isn't it?
And,
we've all seen those. I know there is the Petra Marathon, but this isn't the Petra Marathon. This is a different one. So impact marathons, you're going to make a positive impact. But running around the desert, how do you prepare for, is it going to, because I've been to various deserts around the world and the temperatures can vary. It's not all like the Lawrence of Arabia, 80 degrees, and we're all going to die, in 3 seconds. Some deserts can be a bit temperamental, whatever. So what's the temperature going to be like there? Is it dunes that you're going to be running across, or is it hard surface? What kind of a desert race is this?
Yeah, so it's a sort of red, kind of looks like a red sand rocky desert if you saw pictures of it. So it's not sand dunes. It's quite sort of quite a flat desert with then these amazing rocks scattered through it. And so trying to kind of find places to train on. So I've just been trying to run on slightly different surfaces. And so there's near me, there's this little bit that we often call the jelly bean locally. And so it's just around this little meadows and this sort of gravelly sort of track. And so, so that's a different surface to just practice to running on. It'll be sort of kind of a nice summery, late spring, summer's day kind of weather. It's not going to be super hot. So not as scorching as some of the hot summers we have here, but sort of that nice, sunny, nice weather. So it shouldn't, it shouldn't be too bad. I'm really hoping when I run, I blow my nose loads. I'm like constantly blowing my nose and run. I'm quite hoping that the sort of the dry heat in the desert will kind of stop. It's delightful, stop all the snot. And I'll be able to breathe really well. So it shouldn't be too hot. It gets hot, really cold at night though. The temperature kind of drops at night time. So I'm really excited about it, and just that it's somewhere different. So I've never been to a desert before. I'm really excited. That whole idea of being someone, all you can see is this vastness of desert. That sounds really cool. And I'm so excited to see my name written on it.
I think you're going to absolutely love it. I've been to many deserts. I think one of my visions was about the getting cold at night. I know what it's like because I've been overnight in a desert with the camels, and camels fart a lot. And with 20 blankets on you, you're lying on a dune, and there's all sorts of animals that come out at night in the desert. So, but I don't think you'll have that to worry about. But obviously, we've heard of the Marathon des Sables. It's not, you're not doing 6 sets of
no, just one.
It's the one marathon, but you'll have your pack with you, hydration.
Yeah.
So it's properly organised. You know, you're not sort of just left to your own devices and wander around the desert for 40 days and 40 nights and come back and save the world type thing. But we can go off on the right tangent here, can we, Alia? So, you know, all hell. But yeah, when I was in the Thar Desert, which is on the border of Pakistan and India, the camels that we were with, yeah, they were very friendly camels, but you got moving. And then when the sun rises, it gets hot very quickly. So it gets cold quickly and it gets hot very quickly. But there's something about when you're at one with nature, because the beauty of a desert is there's no lights, there's no traffic, there's normally no people apart from yourselves who are running. It's bliss. I think you're going to have an absolute blast. And obviously being, as I say, an impact marathon that you're doing positive things for the community is going to be brilliant. It's going to be Boston, I think, as some people around here would say. But yeah, I mean, what a thing to be moving on to. And as you say, you arrive at the airport. So I'll be expecting on your social media feed lots of photos of you with your Queen picture and all that. Have you got a crown set up for yourself? You know, or dare I say, have you got a comedy Lawrence of Arabia outfit where you can sort of cover yourself up and a horse turning up and?
No, but I did say, oh, I want one of those neck pillow things. And one of my friends said, oh, you might be able to get one from the airport that says Queen Alia on it. So, yeah. But I do think I'm going to look quite odd when I arrive and I'm like constantly snapping pictures of me and my name, and security may say, what is that strange woman doing? But yeah, I am. I'm really, really excited. And then we'll see what next year kind of brings.
Yeah. Have you got things booked for next year? Are you that kind of person? Do you book ahead a year, or do you just take things as they come?
A little bit of both, really. And so that depending on what the events are. So there's Warrington Way Ultra that just happened at the weekend, and that they will open up next year in May for the event in November next year. And so I will probably enter that because that sells out really quickly. And I did that 2019 and did it in 10 hours 12. It's a 40-mile ultra. It's quite flat. But depending on what the weather's like, can be very boggy and things. But I'd like to do that and see how close to can I get a bit closer to the 10-hour mark in that. And then there's in Salford there's a trail that's sort of done in sections, but actually the whole thing is 50 miles. And so I'd quite like to run all of those sections and maybe see could I run all 50 miles of it. I have these ideas in my head. I think, oh, how far can I run? And then there's weeks when, as many of your listeners will know, that you go out and you do 2 miles and think, oh my gosh, that was it.
I can't go any further. Yeah. You mentioned that trail. I think I've heard that. It's one that goes around the whole of Greater Manchester, isn't it? Yeah, the 50 miles.
So the Salford Trail is just sections of Salford.
Oh, okay.
So Warrington Way goes all around Warrington. There's the Oldham Way, which is 40 miles, kind of skirts around Oldham. That there isn't one. It's interesting.
There's some walk routes, I'm sure of it. I mean, I'll have to dig them up. There's some walk routes that I think my brother-in-law does a lot of walking, and you can do sections. If you've done the whole lot, I think you circumnavigate the whole of Greater Manchester. Yeah. So one section of it goes to areas in Lancashire where there's some reservoirs, which is around Bolton Way, which is obviously where the Ironman is. I don't even know if Bolton's part of Greater Manchester, so there's areas around there. So it's quite a long route. I can't remember the whole distance, but it's one of those where I guess if you know where you're going, you can keep following the route. But it just seems an awful long way. But it's great you've got so many things planned, booked, and it's been an absolute joy having you on this show, Alia. So, I mean, in a bizarre way, and I'm sure a lot of people, even though when they see this, you've already gone to Jordan, a lot of people are saying, oh, is there room in your suitcase? Can you squeeze another one in? It's the kind of thing that people would definitely want to do, because I've been to Egypt and I know the history in Jordan and so on. There's some amazing places there to see. I think there's so much of the world, and it's quite apt that you've got a picture of the world there to go and see. But also, even on our doorstep here, for your doorstep in Salford, there's still a lot to do, and doorsteps here in Worcester as well. So get out there. I think the moral of the story is get out there and share. And obviously, as you've learned from your first Manchester Marathon in 2012, all the way through all those episodes, it's a great rich tapestry of experience, isn't it, Alia? And I do appreciate your time. So thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Love you very much. And to everybody who's watching, listening, you've got to the very end. You've been amazing watching, listening. I'm sure some things you'd like to share with Alia as well, in terms of whether she'd be the Queen of Jordan or not, is that, you know, it's all help and hints and tips. And if you want to come on this podcast, you can also get in touch and get on. But thanks again, Alia. Take care.
Bye.
See everybody at the next Manchester Magic podcast, which will be mile 5. Bye. I think I've pressed the wrong button again.